Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and take this and ink the work. So the reason why I'm going to time lapse the inked portion for most of these, and I'll slow down some areas and talk about it, but it's really redundant. And hopefully you can gain a lot by observation here. So essentially just shaping the work, filling in areas, and the same idea will apply to the cross hatching as I spoke about before. We really need to zero in on the idea that we're trying to wrap these lines around the forms. Not every style will require that, and I'll show some different examples where you can still kind of emulate that more. But again, if you're new to this and you really want to get the most depth out of what you're trying to do, it's better than fighting the form. And by fighting the form, I just mean if you're not kind of perceiving that the rendering lines in some way are wrapping around that volume, then obviously you're going to start flattening out certain areas, and hopefully I've already illustrated that well enough with the other examples. But that's really something that I think helps us a lot to reinforce the dimension that we're looking for. Now, it doesn't mean that every bit of rendering works out exactly the way we hope. Some of it you just kind of have to let be and then come back with future revisions. So what I mean by that is find a style that works for you. It's not like it all has to be perfectly congruent with the underlying forms, or it's just a waste. There's lots of styles where they just kind of throw it in because, again, as I mentioned before, it looks cool. And I don't think there's a lot that's wrong with that. I just think that, again, if your goal is to like really get this nice dimensional feeling to the work with your rendering, then one way to achieve that, probably the easiest way, is to really think about those lines curving around the form. Next, it's just thinking about it as a grayscale tone, a value. There's times I've seen other artists, and I've tried this myself, where you can jump in and do a quick digital paint kind of version, especially if you're working digitally, that's as simple as adding a layer. And you can sort of add in even more ranges of values, like digital painting. You can use a soft brush, hard brush, whatever you want. But the idea there is that because you instill this kind of dimensional value system, your rendering will make more sense. And like anything else, it's just because you have more points of reference. And I'll show an example where we do that as well. It's similar to the idea of the wrapping lines. Again, any way that you can start to think about these areas as three-dimensional forms in space, then your work just tends to get better anyways, in lots of different ways, but very specifically in the way of creating shading and cross-hatching. Now, also remember that you're going to want to play around with lots of different ways to establish these lines. I tend to go with longer, more tapered lines. That's just one particular way. Obviously, there's so many different ways you could do that. You could go with very tight, abrupt lines. You don't have to taper them. You want to try the different variables, but this is a style that I've developed over years that I really like. It's not the only style that I'll utilize. In fact, there's lots of times that I play around with a messier style. So, and again, I'll give you different examples so you can really pay attention to this stuff. I wanted to start a little bit more clean and concise, or what I do the most of, what I aim to be my own particular style. But again, that's something that I developed over many, many years. So don't expect that you need to start rendering and get my style or another artist's style that you really admire. It's great to admire that and take observational notes and add little things into your system of doing things, your style, from these people that you admire, for sure. I think that's one of the best ways to level up our skills and learn more efficiently. But also be careful not to pressure yourself with getting a replication of that, because for one, we have no way to know how long they persevered through certain things, and chances are they went through a couple things that didn't work and things they deemed not functional, not part of their style, before they got to the one that you see that they really had a kind of eureka moment on. Like, wow, this is my style. I love this look. I finally found it, right? It takes years sometimes for us as artists to find those moments. And then ultimately it inspires us and it makes our work better. So again, you can't just hope to look at somebody else's work and immediately have that sort of euphoric effect. You can definitely learn and grow faster from seeing what they do well and what they do right, of course. Paying attention to their shapes of shadows, paying attention to the way they use their line breaks. When do they double up lines? When do they make messy lines just in certain areas to kind of show that compositional difference from area to area in the work? Like there's times when you really need to like mess things up and add some grit and grime to the work, right? And certain artists do that really well. But again, pay attention to that, learn from that, but don't have false pretenses or expectations that now make you feel like, well, they can do these clean, beautiful lines, but I can't. They probably worked really, really hard at getting their hand control that way. And that's why I talked to you about, turning the screen and really zeroing in on the way that you hold the pen even. Like, you do want to think about these things. It's not that it's going to be the all determining factor, because really I think the big one is just time. And you're going to have to create lots of illustrations with lots of different lines so that you start to feel what works and what doesn't. And that, again, just doesn't come overnight. So be ready for that perseverance and that hard work ethic and just enjoying what you do so that you can put enough time into it so that you get the results that you're after. But again, try not to have those expectations early on where it's like, oh, I got to make my stuff look like whomever's work, because that's just a recipe for whenever we compare ourselves to things we can't possibly know all the details of, it can be disheartening. So here I'm putting in some negative lines. So I do this as well at times where if I want to sculpt the shadow even larger, and maybe in this case I didn't take the time to put the rendering on a separate layer. So if you're working digitally, I do recommend that. Do your shapes or shadows on one layer, your rendering on another. It's not that you can't fix it. As you see, I'm doing it here with whiteout, and I'm going to, I usually play around with it for a bit to get what I'm after. But what I'm really looking at is the shape of the highlight on the bicep just wasn't quite what I was looking for. So sometimes I will go back with whiteout and I will resculpt that area in a negative. And actually I do that, I wouldn't even say sometimes at this point. I do that all the time. There's something that's so cool about being able to use whiteout in the illustration that immediately it helps you clean up the work more efficiently. It helps to add another level of detail and style that I never seem to get if I just draw with black and white, black on the white page. It's not until I go back with the whiteout that I sort of find other design elements and ways to sculpt the lines. It's super. Honestly, I can't even explain it, because it just seems like I would just eventually pick up on that and draw it the way that I want to see it. And still, even after all these years of drawing, it's not that way. I just really love going back with whiteout and creating, like especially like you'll see when we do the face example, tiny little fine lines and things like that. There's just certain elements where it's just much, much easier to go back with a white pen, in this case digital white ink, if you want to call it that, white lines, and it's just really, really effective. And I remember picking that up from watching comic artists just use whiteout pens, and so it was one of those techniques that I really wanted to incorporate in my work. So here, just adding some finer lines to the hand area. Another thing is, don't be afraid to shadow smaller areas. So for the longest time, I was always kind of apprehensive about shadowing fingers, for instance, because they're a lot smaller volume than, say, the upper arm or the chest or the bigger scene in entirety, right? And you really can't do that. I don't think. It always looks weird if you have like this good amount of shadowing everywhere else, and then there's a lot less on a certain area. So again, it's that continuity or that consistency through the work. Just remember, you can use very fine lines in smaller areas, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm doing tiny little sketchy lines. Now I'm a lot more comfortable with it, but that's something else I wanted to mention to you, because I remember more in the beginning I was actually very apprehensive, or even just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't add those tiny little shadows and sketch lines in areas like fingers and smaller details. So just remember, line variation can be all across the board. I could have definitely taken this to a lot more of an extreme version of that, using lots more line variation, and that does in turn help you to kind of give a sense of scale within the illustration. So we'll go ahead and conclude this lesson here. In the next one, I want to show you how we can take this illustration and now add a secondary light source to it. So with that, let's move on.